Hi guys, welcome back to Otter's RC Garage. We are back in the garage today and we are working on the 6x6 yet again. So last I left you guys, we had fully disassembled the donor truck. Here's a bunch of the parts laying on the ground. We got our axles, basically everything. So what I have done is gotten the frame rails cut up, and we have the middle sections here, which are the longest and straightest pieces. So I have those. We aren't going to need these. I am going to use these sections though. I'm going to practice welding with these. We are going to extend this frame by welding these onto the end of it. I wanted to make sure it's a good solid connection. I was thinking about riveting and I was thinking about screwing, and I've just seen too many guys that have done that and they end up with a little floppy rear end there. So I'm going to do this the right way. We're going to weld it and we're going to make it nice and strong and solid. So pulling the body off here, I have already gotten the battery tray out of the way. I've gotten our rear fender liners off. We are gonna have to cut this little bit off the end here to get this dovetail out of the way, so we can put our frame extensions on right there. The other thing I want to get out of the way while we're in here is I'm going to take this transfer case off, because we are not going to be using that transfer case, and also give this thing a little bit of a cleanup, I guess, while we're in here. But main thing is figuring out how we're going to mount all this stuff. I'll get back to you guys when I get the transfer case off, the drive shaft off, and these frame rails cut off, and then we should be pretty much to the point of getting it set up and welding. And just like that, truck is stripped down, ready to cut that little bobtail off the back and get to welding. I did remove as much as I could. The main thing, I'm going to still remove this hoop here before we go to actually weld. I want to try and make it, you know, obviously as straight as I can off of that, and also straight that way so it doesn't bow in anymore or out any. One of my biggest things I've been looking at though is how I'm going to mount this transfer case. I think what I'm going to have to do is actually make a plate off of the old transfer case screw holes, so I can then mount this to that plate and get it up a little bit higher so I can clear these hoops for the rear. If not, I can cut those out. It's not a big deal. The links mount here and not in here anyway, so I can cut a little bit of this corner out and get myself a little bit of clearance for drive shafts if I have to. The next thing I'm going to have to do is find some way to mount something in between up here for these carrier bearings to sit, so I can then run the drive shafts obviously from that transfer case to the carrier bearing and then down to that rear axle. So things I'm thinking about as I'm going, still sort of pondering what all I'm going to do. Want to make it very clear, I don't really know what I'm doing. This is just sort of a let's see what we can do sort of thing. So I'm doing my best. There's going to be a whole lot of custom work to make this work, I think, but I think we have a good clear plan and only a few very small details to work out. So I'm going to keep going. I'll come back to you guys hopefully when we're ready to weld these tails on. Got the bobtail cut off there. Figured, you know, I'd use some the old pieces, see if I can't weld it together and how straight I can get it, you know, just sort of practicing some techniques and everything. Went to go start welding and I'm out of wire. I don't even have a spool in there, so I must have ran out last time and said screw it, never got a new roll. So while I'm at the store, I'm going to grab not only some welding wire but some metal so I can make that plate. From what I've been reading, 4mm seems to be about the standard for RC stuff, so I'm going to see if I can find some 4mm thick metal. Being that we're in America, it'll probably have to be some standard size instead, but basically just looking for something thin that I can screw through and we'll paint it up and make it look good. So I got my first little bit of test welding done on this, I think it was both the fronts. I think this is both the fronts. Either way, weld them together. So on the outside, you can see the crack going through, and this was my first little test weld. It did seem to puddle up quite a bit. I did obviously get some penetration, so I did turn the wire speed down. I'm going to try another test piece, but just to show, it is holding. So I think it is going to be good enough, and I was able to get nice and straight both that way and that way. So as far as a test piece, I think that's pretty good. Like I said, I turned the wire speed down, so hopefully I get a little bit better weld on the truck, but I think I'm ready to go. So I'll come back to you when I get both those pieces welded on. And there we have it. We have both frame rails welded up. They are definitely not the prettiest, I will say that first and foremost. I am not a professional welder by any means, and this is probably the cheapest welder you can get. It's a flux core welder, if you guys know what that means. But it did the job. These are attached very nice and well, both of them, and for the most part very straight. It's got a little bit of a bow toe out, but honestly I think once I do that, it's super straight. So this is going to work out excellent. I am super excited about this. So I'm going to get everything put back on here that can be on here factory, and then we're going to see what we got to do to get that rear axle mounted, and from there then the drivetrain. Guys, look at this. It looks like we have a 6x6. So I was just throwing the tires on just to make sure I had some clearance back here, and then I'm like, you know what, I want to throw the front tires on and just see how it looks. I am getting super excited now, guys. This is coming together. So quickly, I got the rear mounted. The shock is not exactly straight up and down, but I was able to use 2 of the existing holes and mount this rear shock brace, so I'm only gonna have to drill out 1 hole in the back to get that mounted. And I can, if I want to, move this one to the back to get it more up and down. Honestly, I'll probably leave it tilted like that, and I might actually tilt the front forward a little bit, give them both a bit of flex. Honestly, it's going to end up determining how they end up riding and sitting. Big moment, guys. It is sitting on its own. Got the links installed in the back here. I ended up drilling some holes in these front shock towers so that I could run the screws all the way through and in. The bottom one, I got those longer screws like I said from the store. Got those on with some nuts on the inside. I did sort of lose my triangulation on the lower link. It does have a small triangulation, but it does sort of go the wrong direction. Optimally, these links on the lower and the front would be more inward than what they are on the rear. So I got a couple options. Honestly, I'm probably just going to run it how it is. The object is to stop the axle from swaying side to side. It does not have much side to side sway because that front is still triangulated a little bit, which is keeping it nice and centered. So I'm not going to worry about it too much right now. If I absolutely have to, I might add like some sort of a panhard or something, sort of like how the front does. But we'll go that route when we get there. So my idea for this transfer case, if you look on the bottom side of it, it has this little hump here because the 2 middle gears are actually bigger than this one gear on the left. The one on the left is about I'm gonna say a 20% underdrive. So unfortunately, the only way I can do this is these 2 axles are going to be driven at the same speed. This axle is actually going to be underdriven. So I may end up having to get some overdrive diff gears to bring this up to the same ratio as the others. To take up that gap on the bottom side of that transfer case, this is what I've came up with. I'm going to take 2 of these little pieces of sheet metal that I've got. I'm going to weld a nice little bead along that, theoretically, on both sides, and make that little step plate. That plate then I'm going to be able to mount where the old transfer case went, and that is going to bring that transfer case up high enough that these shafts will clear not only this post, but it'll also give it maybe enough clearance to clear these, and I won't have to trim any of this out at all. So let's get busy, see how it works. I'll get back to you and let you know. Oh, like I said, theoretically, this welder's not the best, but I did the best that I could with it. I think we can make it work. It's part of some custom RC stuff. It may be ugly. Well guys, we've made it about 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Got the transfer case mounted, as you can see. Got the front and rear axles hooked up, and it is working great. The only problem is where the factory transmission sits. It makes it so that this drive shaft has to cross over top of this shaft and get basically ran right into by that. And I can't put this over here because the third link is mounted there. So I'm gonna move on right now. I have that new front bumper mount area thing, so I'm gonna put that new front bumper mount on so I know where that's sitting at, and I'm gonna see if maybe I can move the transmission up. I'll have to get rid of this cross member piece here, so I have to find some new way of bracing the shock tower across the top. But if I move that up, that should also move it center because of the taper and get it off of that drive shaft, and I'll just have to use a longer drive shaft and still be able to make this work. So let's see what I can do and see what I can come up with. Check this out. So I got the motor mounted a little bit higher. I had to move it up a little bit, drill some new holes. It put it so it's just touching the steering servo with the new servo mount. That new servo mount, that made this thing a whole lot beefier. So not only does that mount into the 4 screws here on the sides, but it also goes to the old servo mount and bolts into there as well. So it completely strengthens this whole entire front end way up. The only thing I don't necessarily like I said, is that it did put it really close to the motor, but that's not a design flaw with this. This is a design flaw with my design because we're custom making this thing. Another issue that we sort of have is those drive shafts. There might be a piece of paper you could fit between those two drive shafts. They don't appear to be rubbing, but it would not surprise me if they do start rubbing. So they're both plastic. They're both going to actually be spinning the same direction. So even if they do rub, I don't think it's going to rub too bad. And it does, like I said, everything moves freely. So I'm going to call it good enough for now. I'll have to figure something out. I also thought about putting a spacer between this screw and the transmission on the inside of the frame rail, and that would sort of kick the transmission more of that way. I think that's what I'm going to have to do. I still have to brace the transmission. It's only held on by these 2 screws, and it relies on these 2 to hold it, which is where the battery tray originally bolted in and then bolted to the other side of the frame. But I don't think that battery tray is going to fit in here anymore. We're going to have to obviously make some sort of custom battery tray for that as well. I did have to sacrifice my one drive shaft I was going to use between here to make this a little bit longer drive shaft than what the factory is. The factory one just won't fit in there. It is at its extents. This is the next day and I've slept on it, and this is what I've came up with. This is what I'm going to use. It's a little spacer I'm going to put in on the inside between the transmission and this frame. So because of the angle of this, that should move our motor away from the steering servo just ever so slightly, and also get our drive shaft here off of the front drive shaft. So I'm going to put that on and let's see how it works. Okay, I got that installed. It did make a little bit of a difference. I do have a gap between the servo now, and the drive shaft is, it's hard to see, but I promise you there is at least a paper's gap of clearance between those 2 drive shafts, no matter even when they move and rattle around a little bit. So I got my clearance there. We are moving on from that. I did make a brace here, as you can see, sort of help triangulate the motor and create its third mount. So I think that's all set. I think the front 2 axles are set and ready to go. We now are moving on to driving that rear axle. So I'm gonna have to make some sort of bracket. I'm probably gonna use that sheet metal I've been using and make something that probably curls up and over this frame here, and we'll mount this right there nice and flat. Alright, I got a little plate made up. It's gonna go underneath these shock tower mounts in between the rails there, and I'm gonna actually have a bolt running actually down from the top down through the bottom of the C-channel part of the rail. So I'll get that installed, show you guys how it looks. And there we have it. Got our little carrier bearing mounted on our plate right between the shock tower, right where I wanted it. Nice little spot. Got a good angle on the rear drive shaft. Most importantly, nice good angle here going to the transfer case, and all 3 axles are spinning the same direction. So this is going to be it for this video. Next video, we are going to make this thing look a whole lot better. I got wheels coming, I got some tires coming, and then still sort of tossing around ideas of what I'm going to do with the body. I'm going to run up to a local hobby shop and see if I can't find a few things, sort of make something work. But I do already have some bumpers picked out for this, some metal ones. So this is going to look great, it's going to work great, and it's going to hopefully pull our trailer around and do awesome off-road with that. So stay tuned, we'll get the body on. Make sure you guys like, subscribe. We'll see you guys next week.